agenda. So we had loaded the agenda into the TAC meeting folder, or Google Drive, I should say, for the January, for today's meeting. So I just wanted to pull up the agenda real quick. This is what we're going to cover today. The design and development timeline, I'm going to show you a document that has a timeline so everyone can get a good sense as to where we are. That'll just take a moment. I'll show you that in just a sec. And then we're going to largely focus on the domain model and the classes, properties, and vocabularies. You know, we've come a long way, and I want to thank all of the TAC members who have been reviewing those documents and posting your comments and issues. We are looking at all the comments and all the issues that are posted, so we really appreciate it. And today, once Stuart gets into that, Stuart and Nate will be covering that. As they get into that, if you feel like your issues or questions aren't being answered, you know, we really want you to feel free throughout the webinar today to, you know, voice your concerns, issues, ideas, suggestions, all that good stuff. There will not be a PowerPoint today. We don't have a PowerPoint. We're going to largely focus on those, the domain model, vocabulary, properties, and classes, and so they'll screen share those documents that were already shared. Now, of course, since sharing them, we've made updates as well, and we'll put out a new model, you know, after the meeting and after your feedback. But I do want you to know that we have been looking at your feedback and we've been making updates. We didn't want to confuse everyone since, you know, we would have gotten out like yesterday. Mike Parsons is here. He's going to talk about the use cases and how they've been reformatted to drive design. We're going to talk about the next steps, and the focus is going to be on the competency area for our next meeting. So we wanted to give everyone a heads up that that'll be our focus moving forward in the February meeting. And then we're going to do an intro to the registry design plan and document that Mike Parsons is charged with, and then we'll just talk about some additional next steps. So this document has been linked to from the CTI Technical Planning website, and as all of you, I hope, are aware, we are making all of the documents available in the Google Drive for you and through links from the CTI website from a page that has the meeting schedule on it. Let me go ahead and pause there and see if anyone has any questions or comments about the agenda. Okay, cool. All right. Well, here's just a quick look at the timeline, and it doesn't look very good in this PDF document. I think it's lost. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing it. I'm just going to share it from my screen because that is not coming across well at all. Let me go ahead and share it this way. So you should see it on my screen. I'll go ahead and make it bigger. Just as a reminder, in the, you can control the share pod yourself and make it full screen if you prefer. So what I want to emphasize here is, you know, we're just getting started here with the TAC. You know, our first meeting, you know, was back in November, and that's when work began in earnest with the first step, and that's our metadata infrastructure design facilitated by Stuart. So you can see we're well into that and really just getting started with everything else. So I wanted to emphasize that we've got a ways to go, but you know, really we have a pretty short timeline in terms of the level amount of work that we have to do and get going on. Now, I also want to mention that with the pilot site partner, you'll note that I have a row that says get credential info from pilot site partners. So prior to getting that credential info, we have to formalize partnerships, and so quite a bit of work has been going on in that regards, I just didn't want to note all of that in this particular timeline. We really just want to know, what is happening with our partners after they sign a partnership acknowledgement agreement. And so, so far we have over 30 partners signed on who have signed an acknowledgement agreement, and we start webinars, individualized webinars with partners as they sign on this month. And we're going to start collecting their credential info. And so it's really important that we're getting that metadata infrastructure as fleshed out as possible so we can go into this information collection, smoothly. Now, we anticipate having to go back to partners for additional information and clarifications. But we want to, kick it off as smoothly as possible. So, this is a real high-level timeline, and I'll be breaking this out in a more detailed project plan. Are there any questions or comments about the timeline? Okay, good. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And we want to go ahead and move on to the core of the meeting here today. So Nate, you need to go ahead and share the screen. And I will turn it over to Stuart and Nate. Stuart, you there?
Sorry, I was muted. Nate, can we start with the main model itself? The one that was distributed to the group. Yes. Stuart,
He wants the version distributed to the group.
Okay. The 12,
yep,
and the 12, yeah.
Okay. Hey Stuart, for some reason suddenly you're sounding very distant. We're having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, okay. I'll speak up. I don't.
There we go.
Okay. Are we in process of bringing it up, or?
Yeah, he's got it here. Sorry, Stuart.
Yep. Oh, that's okay.
There we go.
Is that the 1223? No, that's the 106. Can we get the one that was distributed to the group, the one that they've been looking at, the 1223? Right. Yeah. Great. I wanted to talk just a few moments about progress since we distributed this graphic of the model. You'll note that our discussions, the things that have been coming across in the technical Google group, have been down in the right-hand corner, been focusing on the competencies and the alignment object, and we'll get to those a little later. What I wanted to do, though, was talk about some progress that has been made. Nate, can you kind of scroll us over in the upper left? In essence, we have three core entities. We've got, in the model as we see it here, organization, credential, and then the competency stuff. And then some parallel profiles of the credential. And as the one that was distributed to you has a maintenance profile, a labor market profile, and then way up at the top, there's a credential profile. But if you look at the properties pointing to the credential profile, you see, registration, holder, licensing, and so forth. We knew when we first set out this credential profile as sort of a generic structure that it was quite likely that it would not be adequate in a generic form to satisfy all of those various places, holder, licensing, and so forth. So what has happened and what will be coming to you to see probably in a day or so is a more fleshed out set of individual profiles as instead of that one generic credential profile. And that process has been the result of a continuing analysis of the original data that was gathered, informing properties and things that we were going to be needing. So you'll see that very soon. And it'll take the form of an additional set of in quotes, profiles and a reduction of the use of the credential profile. So our comments on the discussion board have been around the lower right-hand corner, which we'll get to. Any comments on the rest of it at this point?
So, well, this is Pam Frugally at ETA. So I'm glad to see I'm focusing on the labor market profile, because when I saw that in like the outline of the credential framework, sorry, we're getting an echo. I don't know why. I wasn't sure what was going to go there, but you're saying earnings related to the actual credential and employer recognition related to the actual credential. You're not talking about projected employment and things like that, because those aren't associated with credentials.
Jeannie and feel free to jump in. That's one place where there has been a modification coming up in the next round.
Okay.
That hopefully clarifies the labor market, and in essence, what it is that I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think I've got a copy of it here, the labor market profile in and of itself was removed, and some of the functionality that was there is coming directly off of the credential itself, leaving earnings profile and employer recognition profile. Jeannie and
Right.
Nate. Am I
Yeah, that's correct, sir.
Can you, Nate, can you maybe say a few words about why you made why that change was made, or? It isn't.
Okay. Well, whenever I was looking at the labor market profile as described on the CTI site and such, I noticed that it was made up of the earnings profile and the employer recognition profile. But there didn't appear to be any particular relationship between those two objects that the labor market profile itself was defining. It appeared like it was just a container for those two things with no fields of its own. So I wasn't entirely sure if there was any particular value to having an object called labor market profile with those two things inside of it versus just having an earnings profile and employer recognition profile be direct properties of the credential.
Yeah, it actually does make more sense to me that way.
Great.
So Stuart,
Great.
Okay.
This is Robbie. I mean, I have a general question, and
Sure.
I guess I feel it's okay since we're an advisory committee, and that is, I mean, just from a modeling perspective, putting all of these things into Credential seems very, brittle and dangerous. I just will make that comment. In other words, there are various pieces that you want to associate credentials with, occupational profiles and so forth. But by stuffing these all into this large data model, which it seems is what's going on, and that's sort of my question, that's going to make it really, really hard to innovate around every one of these things individually, and it's going to make it very hard for companies to own things. I'm thinking of some of the things that were at this meeting that Pam had, to own things separately and to protect their own proprietary data and yet be part of the open data world. So that's just a comment. I don't know if anyone else feels that way, but and maybe that's not what's intended here. But it just seems like it's a monolithic data model as opposed to something that's modular.
Well, part of the function. Okay, Robbie, I think perhaps I'm not fully understanding, and so let's flesh it out a little bit. In essence, the splitting out of the profiles from the credential itself was to not do it as a monolithic. They're related to the credential, but they're not. They are.
So the idea then.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, then the idea is that these will be separate data models, and then they'll have a pointer, so through a GUID or something to the profile itself.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look at the now, Nate, I don't know if we can flip back and forth, but if you flip that, Nate, to the which one of your links up there is it? To the display that's feeding straight off of the spreadsheet. That's the best I can do. Sorry.
You mean on the credential registry site?
Yeah, yeah, the one that the one that,
okay.
that shows.
Do you want the questionnaire one or the? No, you want the viewer.
The viewer. Yeah, sorry, it is the viewer. Sorry.
This one?
Right, right. So in the linked data context, Robbie, these would each be independent, would each be individual entities. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. It was simply that in the spreadsheet, right? There was no like under the spreadsheet. There's nothing that links. It looked like it was all one big thing because there was nothing that linked the for example, organizations is a credential order, but there was nothing that linked it necessarily to a credential as opposed to being part of a credential. If that makes sense. It may just be the way. Yeah.
Well, no, and I would have to again review one of the things, but those are all of those linkages should be. Now, I'm not quite certain. We've been working on this, so I'm not quite certain that this display is feeding directly off of the spreadsheet. I mean, it's live as we edit and work with the spreadsheet, and so I'm not certain. But all of the predicates relating those entities should be there. But I again maybe not getting.
Yeah, my question is this: is for example the earnings thing. Okay, since you're rolling up. Okay, you scrolled by that.
Yeah. Put it on earnings.
Yeah, I mean just as an example. Okay, so there's nothing in this earnings part of the data model that independently points to a credential. Okay, so in other words, if I wanted to start gathering data okay,
Robbie, it does.
It does. Okay.
Nate, can you get back? Just hang right with which one was it? It was with earnings. Now it should have profile. It should have profile of. That points back to it's a profile of that credential. It should point back.
It's an independent object. That's all. That was my only concern.
Yes. Yeah, they're all intended to be independent objects,
and
that relate back to the credential itself. So someone could just describe the credential, and I'm assuming in the wild that some of that people would in the wild. It may even create earnings and point to the credential. In other words, third-party assertion could do those kinds of things. Yes, but they all should point back. And we've been doing a lot of moving around as we broke out some of these other profiles, and so we missed some of the.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's fine. That's fine. That was fine.
Can I ask a follow-up question to what Robbie was asking?
Sure.
This is Credential speaking. That's all right. So when you were saying these are individual objects and you have these relations in the diagram we saw before, do you essentially have min-max kind of statements on all of these relations, or are they all optional relations? Because that's essentially where you could play around with the modularity by seeing whether or not something has to have a credential, or it's just a possibility that, some profile is a profile of a credential, things like that. So is that all defined through also in what was shown before?
Very good.
I didn't see these.
very good question. And the answer is where we are right now, and I look at the timeline and get a little scared, but where we are right now is we're solely defining the entities and the classes that exist in the model. In other words, we're creating a dictionary of classes and properties. We're not constraining those properties yet. In other words, we haven't profiled we haven't profiled from the dictionary in order to do that. At that level, Jeannie and everybody else with the apps and everything will certainly be needing those kinds of constraints. So the place where we are right now is simply trying to define all of the things we're talking about, credentials, these profiles, competency frameworks, and the things we're saying about them, what we want to be able to say about them, so that we end up with a dictionary. From that dictionary, we'll be profiling to achieve those ends. So one could say, a credential must have a market profile, but that's as we move closer to application. Because bear in mind, from the original stuff, our original intent is an open vocabulary for people to design competency stuff, out of which we will specifically be doing such designs for the CTI, So we're at this,
makes sense.
We're at this dictionary end, and we will get there, where cardinality and optionality, all that stuff comes into play. Did someone else try to break in? So Robbie, does that answer your question?
Yes. I think that answers.
Yes, it answers my question. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, were there other questions? Yes.
Hey, Stuart. Stuart, there's a couple of questions that came into the chat. One concerning Carrie's question about person.
Yes. I was going to, as soon as we kind of walk through this general, I was going to talk about some of the things that came up in the discussions online. And Carrie, the question about persons, well, the answer to that is yes. And in fact, in the revision to the data model that we're doing now, that is we clarify that. There was no inherent intention to limit it to organizations. Is that correct, Jeannie? I think so. So the next round of now it's pretty open. The next round of the model includes organization and person. And person operationally, if you look at the domain model on the screen, has all of the same properties as organization, relationships as organization. So, for example, if you can slide just a little, perfect. So an organization can be a creator of, an organization offers, accredits, endorses. An individual could too. So in other words, it's the model of at this point, since we just added person, doesn't differentiate. In other words, that person has a limited set of the things. So this next round, the next model that you'll see in a day or so, includes organization, or includes person, and does not place any constraints on the outgoing and incoming relationships from those that exist for organization. So, yep, Carrie, that's happening, and thank you for bringing it up. It's a little embarrassing that we hadn't thought of it ourselves.
That's why we have an advisory committee.
Were there other questions?
Save us from ourselves.
Or
This is Pam. Can I just ask a dumb question? I couldn't figure out how to comment on this online. I could look at the documents in Google Docs, but I didn't see where I could comment. And I see some of the things are coming through email, right? But do I need to, on a sidebar, find out how to chat online?
Well, we've been using the Google group to, talk about the things in documents in the Google Drive, I'll send, or we'll include that link in the follow-up. And then for documents that are in there, like that are in a Word format or even a spreadsheet format, you can comment on them. I'll include some information on how to comment directly on them.
Okay. Sorry,
That's
but
okay.
I'm not tech savvy enough. But
Oh, no, thanks for asking. We appreciate that.
Okay, so if there are no more general questions, and you kind of get where the next round of this is going, which is to break out some of these additional profiles, let's talk, since we're at 8:30 already, let's talk about some of the other things that came through the Google group regarding the lower right-hand corner, the competency framework stuff. Nice comments, folks, and I'm sorry that the graphic is down there is so skimpy, but it is skimpy and underspecified, the competency framework, competency and alignment object, because originally, and I'm not sure this is still the case, there was a subcommittee that was going to break out and look at those at the competency framework and the competencies. But it's so integral a part of the rest of it that I think we're all need to be engaged in those parts. And we're going to be tackling the competency frameworks and competencies in the next starting immediately after this meeting. We'll start doing some additional discussing on the Google group. I would like to focus a little bit on the alignment object. And Phil, are you present? I think you are. Phil had a rather typically prescient comment about what the alignment object might be used for, and that triggered off of the comments from Robbie about being able to state through the alignment object who is making the assertion, who is making an assertion. So, for example, we have credential and we've got a competency, and then we've got an intermediate node of the alignment object. And the alignment object in the node I sent, for me, kind of reifies the relationship between the credential and the competency, making it possible to discuss that relationship itself. And who the agency behind the assertion raised by Robbie is a typical example. Others might be what forms of assessment the particular competency node might be subject to. So yes, I think from the beginning we've been seeing an extension of the original alignment object role to be able to include different kinds of relational assertions on that relationship between a credential and a node in the competency index. And so we've already in the revised model picked up on the agency thing, Robbie, that you raised, because it is so typical of it. So in fact, we get that we would have within the alignment object the capacity to not only indicate the target node, which would be some competency assertion in a framework, but we'd also be able to note who made the assertion and a range of other not a range, not a huge range, but other types of assertions on that relationship, about that relationship between the credential and that specific node. And off the top of my head, I mean, it could be, what are there in the context of a given credential, are there required ways of acquiring the knowledge? Are there specific ways of assessing that specific competency? But those, instead of being functions of the competency itself, would become functions of the alignment object. So that the specific competency might, in fact, from two separate organizations or two separate credentials, might in fact point to the same competency, but assess them differently, put other prerequisites around how the knowledge is learned and assessed and so forth. So yes, I would say, Phil, from your email, that was the intention, which removes a certain level of the weight off of the competency framework itself, and makes the competencies themselves more comparable across various credentials that might utilize the same competency.
It also allows infinite competency.
Jim, is that you? You're a little faint.
It is.
Who was just speaking? We
Jim.
couldn't.
No. What, can you hear me okay?
Still a little faint, but much better.
No, Jim, we can't hear you.
How about now?
No.
You sound a little
better.
bit like a gramophone, just a little thin voice, but you're there.
I'm taking out my headset. Is better?
Oh,
Any better?
Yes, much better. Yes, much better.
Okay. I was just saying that that allows for a third party to extend the competency framework and add, let's say, more granular competencies to an existing framework.
I'm not sure how the alignment object would do that. Being a comment on the relationship between a specific, I think, Jim, you raised this in on the list, and the capacity for third parties to assert more granular nodes, or to decompose a competency down into n layers of depth, needs to be there, but I'm not sure that that's the function of the alignment. I just maybe not seeing it.
Yeah, I guess I'm seeing something that is not currently in the model. I'm seeing the alignment in an instance of the alignment object. Well, I guess instance is the wrong word, but the alignment object being used where it says align to, looping from a competency to a competency. I see the in alignment object there as well to define those competency to competency relationships.
So Stuart, this is Robbie.
Sure.
This is one of those sort of modularity questions again. At least as we've been viewing things, those kinds of relationships of competencies to other competencies are defined either at the competency level potentially, but if they're within the same framework, for example, within Common Core, within ONED or something like that, those kinds of relationships typically would be defined within the framework. And as sort of Grit was hinting, there are inferences and rules that are applied to those separately from the alignment of the credential to that particular competency within that framework, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But well, let me ask a question then about how that extension works. So are you saying that, for example, well, we know the Common Core was not deemed specific enough, and that there was, the initiative to decompose them down into more to more functional units that, for example, assessment instruments and so forth might address. While that would be of that framework, are you saying that it can't be, that those kinds of assertions shouldn't be possible by third parties? Because currently people who create assessment tools and assessments do in fact decompose them into more granular levels to address their stuff.
Yeah. No. One would expect that they would be, those kinds of assertions would be made. The question then, I mean, this is the, no, I mean, I'm not saying that in the slightest. I was just saying that there's nothing wrong with saying that a credential, that if there's additional granularity, that a credential is aligned to, let's say, some sort of more granular Common Core standard. The issue becomes that there are implications within frameworks themselves that will either assert that or potentially even contradict it. And that's the issue that I'm trying to get my head around, is how this is going to work in this kind of distributed system where you have different people pointing to different levels of the same framework, and potentially within that framework there are relationships or there are local relationships. It's just something I'm trying to, and I don't want to take up everyone's time. I'm just trying to work through that and try to understand, how this is going to work in practice on the competency side, not just on the credential side.
Correct.
That makes sense.
This is Mark Lubo. I have a question that I think is related to this discussion, and that has to do with what I'll call equivalency. So while a particular organization may define their competency structure, their curricular structure, to obviously have decomposed levels, including assessment objects and other kind of curricular things, two organizations with what we may view as at least similar competencies, but not exactly the same, will need to have a mechanism to associate one to the other for the purpose of transfer of credit, for example. And so a mechanism to declare equivalency and what would be useful.
Yes, I think Mark, probably everybody on the call would agree. I'm not, in fact, I was on a call yesterday, the day before, with IMS that is also looking at, has a task force that is looking at how descriptions, how competency framework descriptions can be handled or how they should look. And
I'm leading that work.
Okay. Well, that same question, is there, and the capacity to map between frameworks, between disparate frameworks, and between nodes in disparate frameworks is an important one. I am not sure, and Jeannie, you should probably jump in, whether that would be within the remit of what CTI intends us to do.
Okay.
In other words, I mean, there are vocabularies out there. I mean, ASN has a mapping vocabulary for mapping between between nodes that is based on similar mapping issues that show up in other kinds of control vocabularies. But being able to map across, and not in a way that is more granular than just a one-to-one map, which is seldom the case, but being able to express the degrees of fit, the degrees in which two things map over. That I think that's is obviously a very important piece, because it's the glue in a linked data environment. It's part of the critical glue. It's the same, and it's the same, not only but that same kind of mapping between, for example, a set of district competencies and a state set of competencies. The cross mapping is the mapping among disparate competency frameworks is an important one, and I think we all agree with that. But I don't know, Jeannie, for example, in the end with CTI, whether the tool specifications and everything are intending to go there.
And it wouldn't have to be in scope at all. I think your
Right.
guidance around the fact that it certainly could be done by individuals or downstream or in subsequent phase, whatever. But if we would agree that this would be the place in a model where one might be able to associate other competencies from different organizations for the purpose of equivalency, then that's fine with me.
Sure. No, I think, you know, there are existing models for competency frameworks that in fact that allow you to assert at the level of a specific competency assertion that this is the same as that, and pointing to something else, to a node elsewhere. And the thing is that we're talking about an RDF model here. We're talking about the capacity to link. So it's a question in many cases of the missing, what I'll call the missing predicates. What are the right predicates? What are the right kinds of, what are the right relationships? Or what are the, not right, probably wrong word. What are the useful relationships that should be enabled in a model? Robbie, you've really encountered this, and I'm sure this whole mapping. So I think within CTI it's kind of a scoping question.
Yeah.
Right, and so Stuart, this is Jeannie, and Stuart had, said I should chime in, so I'll chime in here. So, for this model, the competency framework, alignment object, and all of the things that, have been mentioned thus far are of great interest and needed for the CTI project for one of the apps that is to be designed within the scope, and that's that competency authoring tool. So, but those requirements have yet to be determined. Robbie may want to talk about a project that he's now officially working on with ADL. And as we dig into as we said, for our next meeting, we're going to focus on the competency area. So I think one of the things we'll do to prepare for that is take a look at existing models, existing open work that's out there, because based on our funding and our timeline, we want to make sure that we're utilizing the community of work that's already out there, just as we are with this model. So I would like to defer those details to the next meeting and going forward, but also acknowledge that yes, for the example of the equivalency of competencies is critically, it's going to be important, to all of us.
Thank you.
So,
thank you.
So as Jeannie just said, the plan then is for us, one, to survey what are the existing framework models or description languages for framework models. What are they? No desire to reinvent the wheel. One, there are a couple of intrinsic requirements within the initiative, though, within CTI, and one is they're RDS. They have to be able to function in RDF world and in a link for purposes of linked data and ultimately other kinds of bells and whistles that come along with semantic metadata. So that part we know. That part we know. I don't think that the goal here is to reinvent work that's already out there. And you know, and as we know, there's work going on in parallel with IMS. But there's just no sense in reinventing. So that I would think that the key would be, what does the CTI, what does the credentialing environment require that these models either do not currently support, or could support through extension? What are they? So a canvassing of what's out there that can ultimately deal with data in that RDF in the end, in that, or output data in that RDF context. What are they, and how do they need to be extended to meet the credential community requirements? And I think that's where I think we need to move fairly quickly. What does the credentialing environment need that might be peculiar to credentials? Thoughts? Any thoughts there?
Let me ask you,
There's a lot of really good conversations going on in the chat.
can I ask a question regarding the last comment about surveying what's out there and what does the credentialing community might need? Are you thinking that in terms of languages that are able to express these types of models, that, let's say, what we're looking at right now is a model, a way of describing that and further refining that? What are the languages that can support that, and are there any specific requirements that the credentialing community needs that have implications on what the language can do, other than, you know, the connection to linked data and RDF? Or are you saying more of other existing kinds of models that would fit there? I'm not sure where are you talking on the language or on the model?
I'm talking about I'm talking, I think, on the language. On the language. Well, let me be more explicit, and maybe that would help. Currently, there are a number of description languages for describing competencies and competency frameworks. Out of the UK, we've got INLOC. US has ASN, and ASN has been profiled is being profiled in Korea, has had a long-standing profile. So, I mean, so what are those languages that will fit the requirements that we can build on, as opposed to going, we're going to reinvent, we're going to do a whole new model, yet another model for describing competency frameworks. I would hope that's, well, I don't think we've got time, given that timeline, to do that. That we're necessarily building on top of models with certain constraints, and those are.
And Stuart, I guess there's a question as to whether we need to even do that. And the reason I'm asking is that, I mean, there are, I mean, as you said, there's INLOC, there's IMS stuff, there's all of these different frameworks or languages for expressing frameworks. But that's on the competency side. On the credential side, if we have if we can align to any one of them, it doesn't matter what happens after that. In other words, as long as there's a way to say, here's a credential, somebody has a degree or a certificate or something like that, and that this degree or certificate implies a particular competence, and it doesn't matter really whether we point to an ubiquitous framework which has its internal abilities and lack of abilities, or to an INLOC, or to just a competency definition, an RDCO or something like that. I mean, does it really make any difference for this particular initiative?
This is Jerome Grimmer. I think what you say is true, but it really helps from an interoperability standpoint if the various groups that have these different competency frameworks could come together and form a common competency framework that encompasses what all the groups are trying to do, similar to what happened with the U.S. states with Common Core and Next Gen Science Standards.
Well, Robbie,
yeah, go ahead.
Getting everyone to agree on that sounds like a huge lift.
It may very well be beyond the scope.
If it means agreeing on a common set of competencies, I think it's I think it's a Herculean. That would be a Herculean task. But Robbie, if the target, if I'm looking right now at your paper, if we're looking at global
Yes.
competencies and the capacity for these to participate, and obviously there'd be organizational competence in a sense. In your model, they'd be kind of organizational competencies, but for them to be able to function interoperably, and for according to your first principle, the linking, the whole linking capacity between them, and to be able to do what Mark was talking about with mapping. That, I think that's the goal. I think that's the goal in the end.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if we could, I mean, and I believe that it is possible, by the way, to come up with a more or less agreed upon set of common attributes of these frameworks, because although they differ in complexity and they differ in power, there are some pretty basic things that seem to be in all of them, and that are desirable even if they're missing. I think that is possible, but my question really is where the line is between CTI and that sort of effort. I mean, if it subsumes it, that's great. I mean, I'm just it's simply that it would be great for interoperability if we could just point to a common language. But then again, systems will store things internally in their own ways, and they're going to exchange things in their own ways. So I'm just trying to get the scoping thing as to where the
in the context of CTI.
In the context of CTI, yes.
Yeah,
Not in the bigger
I think if we weren't working at this moment in time, if we were 6 months down the road and some of the discussions in INS, so that were complete, and there was all that CTI was doing was saying, oh, okay, there is a model. We do need to extend it this way because our community has to make these kinds of assertions about stuff. That would be great, because I don't think that the goal is to reinvent or to invent yet another, I guess that's reinvention, yet another competency framework description language. I don't think that's it. That's it. So while it's a very exciting time to be doing this, it's also one where the sands may be shifting a little under our feet, under CTI's feet as it tries to do it. It just isn't, it isn't settled enough. We're up to.
Yes, sir. This is Jeannie. I agree. It's not. I don't see this project as creating some new competency, data model. That we need to look at the work that is out there and build off of it.
Well, it's 2 minutes to the hour, and by the way, Robbie's in my conversation, or bits and pieces of it, were around Robbie's preprint of an article, and I don't know, Robbie, has that been made available to this group?
Yeah, that should be in the. I thought that was put up in the.
Is it there?
Folder.
Yes, I did share that out with everyone, but since the competency is the upcoming, hot topic, I'll make sure everyone gets a direct link to that. And thanks again for sharing that, Robbie.
I think it's a very, obviously no paper is going to solve all of our questions and stuff, but it's a preprint on an article that looks at sort of what I would call first principles, around the competency frameworks, competency framework data. And I would assert that they are valuable principles against which to assess whatever avenue we go down, because they certainly comport with RDS, the world of semantic metadata. They also comport, the suggestions are also comport with schema.org, which is another commitment that we've got going. So I really recommend before we bounce off into discussions here on the Google group that you take time to read the article. I think it's a nice background. When's it going to be published, Robbie?
I mean, it's quote published. I'll let
Never
Amy
mind.
try to explain this organization that is.
I understand.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, we're at 9 o'clock.
Hmm?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
California time. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, yep, so we're an hour in, we have an hour and a half allotted. We do want this to be the bulk of the time, so if there is more to cover, you know, with the data model, vocabulary properties, let's please go ahead and do that, because
well,
the other things on the agenda won't take very long.
Well,
So
I'm sorry, I thought it was an hour and a half. Wow, that's abundant. One thing that that may not be clear is how the various pieces of this documentation stuff works together. We're working on the domain model. There is a spreadsheet, and I think that's what you were referring to, Robbie. The spreadsheet, which, if you look at the first 3 columns of the spreadsheet, are basically the definition of the center column is the definition of properties. The first column is the domain, or used absolutely incorrectly, who here, for example, alignment type belongs to. So if I were doing a template for alignment object, I would have a property, an element, the field for alignment type, and then what are the values of expected values for those. And as Robbie correctly pointed out in the Google group list, a lot of these properties have their correlate in schema.org. And we know, we understand, and what the spreadsheet represented was simply an inventory of the kinds of assertions we felt coming out of the use cases and the data, the early data of the initia's early data, what sort of assertions needed to be made. We have to make a second pass through and align vocabulary, the properties, that with schema.org where we can. So, for example, the creative work properties will have to be looked at, and Robbie, you noted that in your email too, that this mapping has to occur. So that has not occurred, but this table, this spreadsheet, is used to dynamically generate the viewer. Is the viewer close by there, Nate? And so the viewer is, so if you click on any of these here in the viewer, the data here is coming straight off of live off of that spreadsheet, so you can see us doing our dirty work. There are the places where the greatest volatility is right at the moment is around the shifting that I mentioned at the beginning, from that generic credential profile into more discrete profiles. And we don't promise that right at the moment that the domain model graphic, which should align in a perfect world with the spreadsheet, which does align with the viewer, that all of those things are currently in sync because we're making a lot of changes. So we will have a new, a revised credential model to you pretty soon that will, within days. And we have a call right after this to talk through some things. But that will include the organization person stuff and the further breakdown of these into more discrete profiles. So anyway, that's how those components work. Any questions there, or any questions on all of this? Because Jeannie, I had misunderstood our timing. I would have talked slower.
You're good.
Let me ask, Phil, can I ask you specifically, you raised the alignment object thing, and what's your sense of what you've heard? You there, my friend? Phil Barker.
Who are you asking, Stuart?
Are you there, Phil? He was there earlier. He may have had to jump ship. That's okay. That's all right. He said he was going to be very interested in the discussion.
But he's there, but he's asking if we can hear him. And the answer, Phil, is no, we cannot hear you.
Ah. Sorry. We heard some static. Well.
If I try again, can you hear me?
Now we can. Yes.
Okay. I didn't do much, but what I was saying is that, yes, I'm really pleased that you're using the alignment object to convey information about the alignment itself. That's a really sensible use for it in this context. One question that I have about the current model is I note that you've got a lot of information about the competency that's being aligned to in the alignment object. What I mean specifically is that you've got the target name, target description in the alignment object, that you're using those rather than having a name and description in the competency object. Any thoughts on that?
Bill, I'm not quite sure what you mean. Are you talking about in the spreadsheet? Let's see if we can find a line. Oh.
Yeah, just what you've got on the screen now. Those properties of alignment object that are target description, target name, they describe the competence to which you're aligning.
Correct, and they do here too.
So, yes, so just underneath it where you've got competency, why not have properties of competency as name and description, which would be that self-same information? Yet why have that information in the alignment object, not in the competency object?
Well, the competency object, my assumption is that the competency object would have that information. The reason I would imagine that it would show up in the alignment object is partially the same one that we encounter with LRMI, and that is one, systems that don't want to resolve the URI to get data, and we know that is the case. And I think that's a huge reason. I mean, one of the reasons you note in your email was that one of the roles was to be able to include that information when, in fact, there was nothing to point to. I mean, literally point to. The other is that it's easier on systems that don't want to play the linking game and go gather data, the data that's readily available.
Okay, that's good. That's good. It was really a question about, what are your assumptions about the systems that are going to implement this model, rather than questioning the validity of the model itself.
Yeah, well, I think we have to be ready for just as we are now, in where we are in the world, in time, for systems that simply don't play linked data principles. They just don't play that game, and I think it results in. But I think that was one of the big drivers for the alignment object to begin with. Is they want the data.
That's correct.
The data in front of them. They don't want to go out there onto the open web and pull back data. They want to have it there. The only other thing, also the alignment object, Phil, as you know, has the alignment type, and alignment type is when you talk about indirection. I mean, the layers of indirection with the alignment type are pretty hefty. You'll note that the required competency property would be what would also show up in the alignment type. So required.
I did note that, and I like that.
So unlike the current state of LRMI, where there is this kind of abstract relationship to alignment object, suddenly you get for example, you get a record and it's got 20 educational alignment properties, 20 of them. And you go, what's on the other end of those? What's on the other end of that? What's in the alignment object? What's there? What am I pointing to? You can't tell. So you could have this massive list as opposed to properties that actually tell you. And so we're assuming, the same assumptions that alignment object did, but what is going to be implemented is a property that so the property is required competency. So this alignment object is about required competency, and then fleshes out with any additional comments on that relationship. And may leave alignment type empty or put it in, but it would be the which is a different structure than LRMI.
Yes, I think that's good. One of the things that what I characterized as being the indirection that the alignment object allows you to do is that to a certain extent you define the model or define the schema with the data that you provide, and that doesn't always make people's life easier.
I think it almost always makes it harder. Yes, I agree. So in this sense, CTI is taking advantage of the best features of alignment object and going to try and avoid part of that ambiguity around the indirection by actually providing required competency. We know exactly what the relationship is.
And that's good, because you're not working under the same constraints as we were when we first put together the LRMI spec.
Correct. There was somebody else who was trying to jump in. Was there? I thought I heard someone attempting.
Yeah, so this is Ravi. I have a question. It wasn't me, but so I mean, you have here required competency, but presumably you also have links to which competencies the credential implies. Is that so?
Sure. That would be the target URL at the bottom. So there's a competency or an array of required competency alignment objects that then relate to a specific node.
Right. So yeah. So then the question is, and I think your point's very well taken about there are going to be systems that only read the data that's in the credential.
Yeah.
And don't go out and retrieve data in the way that they're supposed to. But given that there's going to be high stakes here,
I mean, there are going to be credentials that really mean something that people, that we need to understand whether that credential is evidence for something. It seems like you should have some way of saying within the credential itself that the competencies, that your mileage may vary, that the competencies that we're describing here are not the authoritative version of the competency.
In the alignment object.
Yeah, in the alignment object.
The alignment object is not the authoritative. Yeah,
exactly.
That's always the problem when you're reproducing that text. But in some ways, even what is in the data that is in the competency framework and the competency framework and and the competencies of which it's comprised are in many instances not the competencies. They're a data representation of the competencies.
Correct.
And so you're already one away from the official. Just
right. Understood. And and in many cases, in a lot of cases, that doesn't matter. But in a case where you have, is somebody certified to fly an airplane, it really does matter. And those things do change. I mean, there's a credential for a pilot, but the FAA makes a new regulation and requires that everybody have training on a particular device or whatever. Those kinds of things really, really do matter. And so there's got to be some way of I mean, it just seems like it might be a good idea to allow a way to flag those sort of issues.
Well, yes, and I agree. And part of the problem, and this was something that most any competency framework will face. They are living things. You're right. They move. Oh, no, I don't mean move. I mean they grow. They are living. They're not usually static things. And when you, in a thing like the alignment object, reproduce any text, there's always a probability that that text will not be correct 2 years from now in that alignment object. That's one of the beauties in the end of resolving the target URL, because at that point you're at least getting the canonical to the extent that the data representation has been kept up to date with any changes in the actual competency framework that underlies it.
Right, but I think there's another issue. This is Pam, and I sort of felt this about the thing called licensing profile. Like a license is a really, really special kind of credential that is required, and that's like an airplane pilot, right? And it has to be current and all that. So I didn't understand why it was a characteristic of a credential when a license is a type of credential, and it would probably need to have some special licenses, would need to have some other special things about them, right? Like, are they required nationally or in which state, and all those kinds of things. It seems to me that's a special class that has to be accommodated, unless we're not doing license.
The definition of credential is quite broad, and it does include licenses. Jeannie, can you address the question or the comment?
Well, on the licensing profile, haven't we expanded that to be an object?
Yeah, that has since changed.
Yeah, because there is quite a few, just as Pam was saying, there is quite a few criteria around the license.
Is that up to date in the spreadsheet or in the viewer?
Yeah. In the viewer it would be. Let me see here. I'm trying to recall exactly what we did. We may have changed was that the one we changed to?
Must have.
Renamed it? I don't recall.
Is it up there? Oh, that's okay.
Okay, so maybe I haven't looked at the latest one.
Well, and it is
or
a movie.
It's possible I also didn't understand it when I did.
So if there's any doubt, put them on us. It isn't you. Yeah, it's okay. It's not that. Well, it is now in that process of breaking out the license is now an entity. It is a profile unto itself. Maybe well, of course, the spreadsheet wouldn't show it either. But.
There's some confusion because in the spreadsheet it says license.
Yeah,
and
but
the
that sounds
descriptor is
good.
Creative Commons license. That's a different kind of license than you're talking
Yeah,
about.
I didn't notice that. Yeah, no.
Yeah, not.
No.
Yeah, that's not the license.
Thank you.
Profile.
Good catch.
if it is a profile.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other issues that we should deal with at the moment? Jeannie, do you have any housekeeping things that you need before we? Hi.
I did have one other question. This is Pam again. About there was some place in there where it says, please list the relevant NAICS industry or ESCO skill codes. And I'm still trying to figure out ESCO from exploring it online. But it seems to me logically that an ESCO skill code would be much more fine-grained than a NAICS industry, unless they're using the word skill to refer to industries, which I hope they're not, because everyone already uses the word skill so terribly.
Pam, first of all, I think...
So could someone explain that to me?
This is being read from the far right columns, from the questionnaire.
Well, yeah, it's under industry profile. It says title, type, multi-object question, and the questions, which means what you would put here, is list the relevant NAICS industry or ESCO skill codes. Yeah, I didn't, you know what? Somehow I couldn't see the row number when I was doing this, so I didn't know how to write it down. Maybe my Google...
Okay. I think that what we're trying to do here with that spreadsheet is just use those questions to cross-reference just the rows in the spreadsheet. And actually, we're likely going to end up not really using a questionnaire format. We're going to have more of kind of a form, an entry form. And what we're looking at is making sure that we're including opportunities to directly reference codes. So for occupation codes, it might be, the SOC, the Standard Occupation Classification, or it could be for industry, the NAICS, or for education, the SIPs. But we also want to make sure that we're not over-specifying. So other classification codes could be used, such as ESCO. As well.
Okay. So, I mean, there's something in ESCO that corresponds to industry. I hope it's not called a skill code, but if it is, that's their problem, not mine, I guess.
If I remember right, ESCO was divided into, it had like 3 categories or something within it, and one of those was industry, and another one was more like competencies and skills and whatnot.
Right. That's what I would think. That it's called something else, but I guess we can work on that later.
There may be some confusion, Jeannie, that's caused by those far right columns. The key columns, in terms of the data, the key columns are, I think, yes, are the ones that we see here, A through G, which in the model define classes, properties, the kinds of range of those properties, and any specifics around whether there's a control vocabulary. And if it's a literal, is there a language tag, or is there a data type like date or so forth? Those 7 columns are the critical pieces. Everything to the right, except for the next 2 columns, which are definition and extension of the definition. So comment and description are relevant. And then from descriptor on, from J on, the committee is better off not looking at them, because they are the fodder out of...
Yes, that's true.
I don't think I could figure out how to scroll over there anyway. But
good. Then you won't wander into dangerous territory.
You won't have to look at them then. Yeah. Okay, we only have a couple of minutes left, but we did want to really make sure that we were focused on, the domain model, the properties, because that is essential to all of the work going forward. But we are running out of time, so if it's okay, I would like to go ahead and just quickly cover a couple of other things just to ensure that people are aware of the other work going on.
Yep.
Is that okay, Stuart? Can we segue to that? Okay, well, everyone would have seen that there was a couple of updated documents in the Google Drive that include the use cases. We still have a need to collect use cases, so we're still asking for use cases. This is all of the use cases that we have collected so far, and they're just kind of formatted in a more, useful way for design. So we'll be basically taking off the current just kind of matrix that was put on the CTI planning site and replacing them with these documents, which are all clearly works in progress, because as a part of those use cases, we need the properties. So we're kind of crosswalking them to the document. So I wanted to mention that. That was on the agenda. Mike was going to cover it, but I'm a faster talker, so I am. And then the other thing on the agenda that was to be covered is the intro to the draft credential registry design work. I want to ask Mike to just touch on that so everyone is aware that he is, pursuing that now.
Right, so I think as people know, the Credential Registry is essentially will be built upon the Learning Registry. So this graphic just is a reminder of that the Credential Registry has a primary node that consists of a network of nodes that has a replication, so that there always should be a node available. So on the upper left hand, this is representing an example of, say, an authoring application where it downloads information from the registry, and that would be an example of, competency frameworks, organizations, as well as credentials. And a person who's authoring then will put the information in, as would be taken, of course, from the domain model, create a credential, organization, and other objects that then would be sent out to the Credential Registry. So the object sent up will be a complex object, so you don't have multiple transactions going up. And we're in the process of discussing with Joe Hobson and Steve Midgley about some enhancements to the way the registry is structured, but that's just early stages. So the process wouldn't really change. It's going to be similar to the Credential or Learning Registry, where you have an envelope containing necessary objects and properties that just gets published to the Credential Registry.
Okay. So we'll have each month we'll have design information going out, and we'll largely for that area of work be putting things on GitHub. As things progress with that. Mike did post some issues. I know Stuart posted some issues to the GitHub repository as well. So we'll kind of use that as our, means for issues feedback. And just as a reminder, all the work will be done under open source licenses, so we will be using GitHub to make that work available. We're basically out of time. I ask if anybody has any closing questions or comments. If not, thanks again so much, everyone, for all of your conversation. We will be re-looking at the chat. There was a lot of great conversation going on in the chat. Thanks for that and talking amongst each other. We appreciate it. As Stuart mentioned, you will see an updated domain model and spreadsheet and the viewer that's fed by that spreadsheet going out fairly quickly. It will be based on all of the feedback from today's meeting and that's submitted from the Google group so far. And if you could continue to provide that feedback, it's so essential and important. We truly appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jeannie,
Thanks, everybody.
Do we just stay on, or do you want to re-log back in?